Day one, I will seal the border, stop the invasion, and
we will begin the largest deportation operation
in American history.
According to the latest estimates, approximately 11.7 million undocumented immigrants currently reside in the United States, which amounts to roughly 3.5% of the total U.S. population. The United States has more international migrants than any other country in the world, surpassing the total of the next.
That's quite a few. I think they were just about to say more than the next few combined, which makes sense if they're at 50K and the next one is just shy, 50 million, and the next one is just shy of 16 million. And so that's quite a few immigrants, but also US is a pretty big country. Curious to see that there are other countries that are much larger that also don't have that. Ones that immediately come to mind would be like India or China, who have huge population bases. But one of the key things about America is obviously people think of America as the land of opportunity, that there's a chance of you kind of changing your luck or turning your life around or making your fortune here. I don't think there's as big of a expectation of that in places like China, where there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of information that is being hidden from their citizens. There is misinformation that they're getting shared. And then there's also like Indian culture, where I believe they have an issue with having too many people, such that it drastically lowers labor prices. So that way it's hard to get a high paying job there because there's so many people. And so this is similar to there basically just being a pretty tight market there for a job market, which happens in US as well. So we have seen one somewhat recently, and so this is where when there's more people compared to how many jobs there are, then usually wages go down, benefits go down, and generally it's not a fantastic time for you as an employee, and that you sort of start to get taken advantage of as an employee. And then the opposite is true in the reverse, where if there's a place with a lot of jobs, presumably like the US in this case, and not enough people, then those employers are willing to pay premium for any employees who join them.
4 countries combined. In recent years, the United States has not deported more than 500,000 immigrants under formal removal orders in a single fiscal year. If President Trump follows through on his promise, the country could see a deportation operation on an unprecedented scale.
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it. You have rules, regulations, laws. They came in illegally.
Last time there was a lot of focus on building the wall. This time there's much more focus on the interior and much more rhetoric about the interior. So I think that they will feel the need to really show some results.
So how exactly will the mass deportation be carried out? And what impact will it have on the US economy? Many experts warn that a deportation of such scale could be devastating to the American economy.
Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the surge in illegal immigration over the last few years will increase gross domestic product by about $9 trillion cumulatively over the next decade, reduce the deficit by about $1 trillion. These are very significant, and it's only part of the illegal immigrant population that he's talking about rolling back or eliminating.
Unauthorized immigrants are key parts of the workforce, especially in agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and the service sector. So those areas of the economy would be hit particularly hard when there's fewer.
So they seem to be kind of switching back between what I'm assuming is legal immigrant impact on GDP and the economy and illegal immigrants. So I think broadly speaking, the expectation in my mind would be legal immigrants, valid immigration into the US should generate value for the US and for Americans. You are in many cases hiring, I believe, either somebody who's highly skilled or somebody who is filling a particular need for a particular skill set that we are running low on in America. That's sort of the idea behind like the O1 and the H1B as examples. There are obviously other visas as well that exist, but generally speaking, it's to support people benefiting America and the jobs here and the people here. So it makes sense that GDP and our economy would get better with those folks. Obviously, if you take a skilled individual, put them in a spot where they have a job that they can do and then generate more value, which is true for every employee. You aren't going to be employed if you don't generate more value for your employer, then it costs them to pay you. So effectively, any employee is generating more value than what they're getting out of that job by definition. And so that makes sense. The illegal immigration side, this is a weirder argument that I've heard a few times, which is, as this individual is highlighting, that the agriculture market is being held up by this, or propped up by illegal immigrants. And so this is a weirder argument that's being made where, if I'm following this argument correctly, and if I'm not, feel free to add your thoughts in the comments, but the idea behind it, from what I understand, is we can keep prices of agriculture and crops low because effectively we're underpaying illegal immigrants to do this work. And so that's a weird argument to have, which is our economy is doing so well because we're not paying people fairly and that they're here in the country illegally. That seems like an odd situation. Obviously, if these individuals left the country, what would likely happen is that you would either, one, have farms or other businesses that can't sustain themselves, and so they eventually fall out and go bankrupt or dissolve in some fashion. The other side is that the expectation would be you then pay an American to do that job, which is what I think the Republican Party and the conservatives generally are hoping for out of this type of change, which is you then hire an American for a fair wage, like a legal minimum wage, like the federal government institutes. And then that would presumably increase the prices of crops and goods, which I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't enjoy. So this is one of those things that, like, this could potentially backfire on some of Trump's policies of advocating for making goods and groceries cheaper in his time in office. And then basically those cost increases would be passed on to consumers like you or I. And so this is where an odd argument is that, like, somehow we're better off for underpaying people who are legally here. That doesn't really make sense to me, since we're effectively taking advantage of these individuals. That's presumably the entire expectation. Obviously, they are enjoying the work enough to some extent, but also we don't know that for sure. They could also feel trapped in this scenario because maybe they're afraid of getting caught in some way, and obviously they're only getting paid a much smaller paycheck than what the federal government or that state is saying is necessary to have a reasonable living. And so we're definitely taking advantage of those people, or at least the individuals who employ illegal immigrants intentionally and underpay them intentionally. And so it's a weird argument that I've heard made a few times on this. We'll see what else they have to elaborate on it, but I'm not as convinced.
For workers to take the jobs in those sectors, but US born people do not slot into those jobs that are left behind by unauthorized workers. And that's because the jobs are less desirable.
Immigrants are also consumers. So if you have a community where 10% of the people are unauthorized immigrants and suddenly those people are no longer there, buying all of the other goods and services, and that can hurt the whole economy of that community.
Research has also shown that 44,000.
So there's an interesting other case that they made. So they said a couple things there, one of which was these are less desirable jobs, so then US individuals wouldn't want to take those jobs. It depends on what they mean by less desirable. I think on one side, they usually are more labor intensive. As they showed there, these are people who are down in the dirt trying to pick those plants, whatever those crops were. And so obviously that's going to make it less desirable in so much as it might be harder physical labor. But I think one of the other aspects of it, which they might be encapsulating into the sentiment, is that they're lower paid. And so again, this is where if they didn't exist and they had to find somebody to pay, the company is going to figure it out. I think a similar argument has been made for the increase of minimum wage. And this is why I don't love this argument as much, is because a lot of times companies and other businesses mention how increasing minimum wage is basically going to destroy their bottom line. They're not going to be able to keep functioning as a business. And there's been so many reports and research done in this area that actually shows in some cases the businesses actually do better after minimum wage increases, and that none of them seem to statistically increase their likelihood of failing as a business due to those changes. And to me, this is effectively what that is, which is you're increasing the base pay for the jobs that illegal immigrants are doing, and then therefore Americans or other immigrants who are here legally would then get paid a fair wage that would be regulated and is supervised normally, and that nobody's taking advantage of those people, and they have to pay out a little bit more, and maybe this reduces their profit margins a bit, but they're also artificially inflated today for them to take advantage of it. The other side was that other individuals said that they're a portion of the consumer base. This again is a weird argument, because if the total argument in its entirety is we underpay these individuals who are here illegally, and then they use the little money that we give them to then pay for things in the community, it doesn't really add up to me, where obviously that is going back to the community. But again, if an American worker was there, they would get paid more, they would be able to consume more, and they would be treated fairly. So I think that's the core of that argument, and I think this is why a lot of conservatives and Republicans believe in this segment. Overall, generally speaking, illegal immigration is illegal, so I do frown upon it, generally speaking. Obviously, you should try to come into a country legally. You shouldn't do anything illegal in any country, really. I wouldn't advocate for that. I think that would be wrong, and I'd probably get in trouble for advocating otherwise.
US-born workers could lose their job for every 500,000 immigrants removed from the labor force.
As an example, if there's a construction company and they rely on an immigrant workforce to do some of the hard labor, the roofing, the digging, the laying of bricks, but they also employ a lot of other workers as well who might be US born to do marketing, to be an accountant, to manage the workers, to manage relationships with clients. If that firm loses their immigrant workers who do the manual labor, they may also need to lay off their US born workers who perform a variety of other jobs, because they can't sign contracts if they don't have the workers to do the work.
Yeah, again, so here they seem to be completely basing their argument off of if those workers leave, those jobs disappear, which again doesn't quite make sense to me, because again, the easiest way for a business to survive, if you're a business owner, you want your business to survive, you want to keep making money. If you found an area in which you have been functioning successfully as a business, then you know basically the only thing you can do is hire somebody else, pay them more. And there's no reason, it's not like every agriculture or every farm in America is just going to say, you deported all the illegal immigrants that I'm hiring and paying under the table and not fair wages, I'm just going to close up shop. That's not going to happen realistically. It is possible some of those farms or some of these construction companies or whoever else is partaking in this would close down if they aren't of sound business and they can't sustain fair wages to their employees. But then this means the businesses who can figure it out are going to be able to raise their prices. Because again, most basic form of economics is supply and demand. And so if companies start failing because they don't have the right employee base and they can't get the right margins, and there's a lot of competition that they can't sustain themselves, then as they fail as a business, the competitors who are doing well are going to be able to increase their prices because the supply has decreased, but the demand has stayed the same. And that will eventually offset those costs. So there's a chance that maybe we have too many farmers or too many construction companies that are taking advantage of this, but eventually we'll get to the right sustainable number. So again, it's a weird argument where they're assuming those jobs just disappear.
Sudden reduction in the labor force could also have an impact on prices.
There's a sense that new immigrants have placed a strain on the United States and really taken a lot of resources at the same time that Americans were struggling with the impacts of high inflation and rising prices.
This is an interesting case. I am not sure why they would expect illegal immigrants to keep you from owning a home. I'm not sure if this is something where they're describing it's propping up general prices or something along those lines, because I'm not sure if illegal immigrants can purchase a home, at least not with, I wouldn't expect with a standard mortgage. You have to put in a lot of paperwork and have a lot of things. to be able to prove that like you're working in a legitimate way, the money that you're getting is legitimate. So that would be odd to me that that would even be possible, but maybe they'll explain more here.
But immigrants, especially unauthorized immigrants, are much more likely to work in the types of jobs that create the goods and services where we're seeing the prices go up. And so we can't say for sure what the effects will be, but based on what we know from past mass deportation efforts, it seems like, especially on these goods and services where unauthorized immigrants are super concentrated, like construction and agriculture, that the prices are likely going to go up.
Undocumented immigrants are also a substantial source of revenue for governments, paying $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes in 2022.
And so if we were to remove immigrants, this would have a negative effect on the federal government budget. And this is especially true for really important programs like Medicare and Social Security. Immigrants typically pay into those programs, but they're not eligible to receive benefits from those programs. And we know that those are programs that are having huge budget crises already, and we expect them to have even bigger crises in the future.
Well, I would go back to what I think Tom Homan said and others, which is, what is the price of national security? How do you put a price on not having within your borders literally hundreds of thousands of people about whom you know nothing? Congress decides to let in another 5 million aliens for whatever reason and make them Americans in a different process. That's Congress's privilege and prerogative. But until they change the laws, we have to enforce the laws.
The net cost of illegal immigration for the United States was estimated at $150.7 billion at the start of 2023.
So I'm not sure if this is exactly that individual's point, but I think it is a strong counter-argument to this claim of, let's say we think it's good for these individuals who are trying to come into America, we want them to be here, then why don't we just increase the number of immigrants we allow into the country legally? Like, that seems like a very fair way to offset this. They get to enjoy benefits of things like Social Security, etc., when they come here legally and they're able to stay for a certain amount of time, especially if they become citizens. I'm not entirely sure exactly at what point you gain benefit of Social Security. And also, I'm not entirely sure that previous individual highlighted how immigrants are paying into Social Security. That, I believe, is true, especially if you're here, unlike an H-1B. I think you do pay into Social Security and taxes, etc. And then I don't think you're able to benefit from Social Security unless you become a permanent resident of some type. But I don't know if that's true for illegal immigrants, because presumably they're illegal and then they wouldn't have Social Security numbers, or they wouldn't have some other type of identification number to then report to the IRS. So again, they might have been conflating throughout their argument standard legal immigrants with illegal immigrants. But again, here, this is where just having more legal immigration seems like a reasonable counter-argument to this is, if we want so many immigrants to be here, then let's just increase it. And I'm in favor of that. I think I've previously mentioned on this channel, I am one of the first in my family that is born in America. My parents both were immigrants. They came here legally. I think it was a great thing. It worked out for them. It worked out for me. I think immigration is a net positive, especially when it's done legally, and there's a particular need or value add that those individuals can bring. But again, that's separate from illegal immigration, and it seems like some of these arguments are kind of conflating these two.
Entirely open borders and a welfare state absolutely does not compute. You're seeing this not just in the United States, you're seeing it in Great Britain, in Canada, in Germany, in France, in Italy, where the needs of this large population of recent arrivals are exceeding the capacity of the host country to sustain them.
However, some experts question how much undocumented immigrants can benefit from government welfare.
Unauthorized immigrants, unlike refugees or asylum seekers that actually do have at least some kind of legal status, are not eligible for most federal, state, and local programs. And so unauthorized immigrants are actually much less expensive if you're thinking just in terms of government spending.
Nonetheless, major cities across the U.S. have seen immense spending in response to the sudden influx of migrants. New York City is projecting to spend $4.75 billion on asylum seekers in fiscal year 2025. And Chicago has spent over $600 million on costs associated with new arrivals.
I've been watching people in Chicago and New York who have lived there for generations complaining to their local government that, look, what about us? You guys are spending billions of dollars on social services that we don't qualify for people who just arrived in the country last night.
The exact logistics of Trump's operation remain unclear, but the incoming administration...
So, one of the issues that I just have with how they went through that, when they had multiple people going for the against case and only one individual in the for case, maybe those arguments that he gave were reasonable, or at least his particular rationale. But again, that was quite to what I would have assumed was an extreme. Most of the counter arguments that I've heard were more in line with what I highlighted earlier, which is like benefiting Americans, whether folks are here legally, which I guess does go to the security portion. But that individual didn't seem as reliable as a source as the previous individuals in the against case. And again, there was only that one individual against the other two. And they also went back and forth between the for and against individuals in the for case, and in the against case, they only had individuals that were against. So that felt very biased to me personally. So I didn't feel like they had a good representation of it. I do like that they at least put in some for and against. I do appreciate when news outlets do that, just because I think it helps reduce some of the bias, but also using like a straw person argument, or maybe having an unreliable source to base their case on, feels like you're sort of betraying the attempt a little bit there. I don't know. What do you guys think? Please post in the comments if you think otherwise, or you agree with me.
Has emphasized that it would prioritize deporting individuals who pose a threat to the United States.
We're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it.
I would say that they are taking very seriously the idea of resuming law enforcement and trying to reestablish the rule of law.
I think most Americans would agree that if somebody's in the United States without authorization and they've murdered someone or committed some other terrible kind of crime, that they should be deported.
But some experts question the intent behind these claims.
If you look at what they did last time, they rescinded the requirement to target criminals first that was in place under the Obama administration. So there's absolutely no basis for claiming they will go after criminals first.
President-elect Trump has also stated that he will declare a national emergency to carry out his plans. This grants the president over 130 special authorities, including the ability to redirect certain funds to initiatives that the president deems necessary. During his first term, Trump used a similar approach to allocate billions of dollars toward building the border wall, after Congress had originally rejected his request.
Main constraints on removals, in many cases, it does come down to funding and logistics and appropriation and priorities. And this time they have more allies in Congress who want to fund the operation.
It would cost the U.S. an estimated $88 billion annually to deport 1 million immigrants per year.
That's essentially 10 years of ICE's budget in 1 year. And it's going to be used in ways that are much more, whether I want to call it efficient, I don't know, but cost effective than what they're doing now.
A critical component of Trump's plan involves using military assets to aid the effort. The Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 has generally prevented presidents from deploying federal military personnel as a domestic police force. During America's largest deportation operation in 1954, this law prevented President Eisenhower from using troops to return more than 1 million Mexican immigrants out of the country.
We have a tradition in the United States dating back a century and a half that the military is not used on U.S. soil to enforce civilian laws. And this would be a breach in that custom.
But there are other ways that the military can assist without directly enforcing the law themselves.
Lesser involvement from the military wouldn't really be unprecedented, involving them as hosts for immigration detention centers, not really that unusual.
It's more likely that members of the military would do back-end operations, sort of paperwork, freeing up ICE agents to do actual arrests and more direct processing of people.
Trump has also discussed invoking laws like the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to help out with the operation.
The Alien Enemies Act is an authority under which the President of the United States can order non-citizens who are from a country with which the United States is at war or being subject to an invasion. They can detain them, arrest them, and remove them from the United States strictly based on their nationality. While on its face, it seems pretty clearly to go beyond what the statute envisioned. Many courts are loath to intervene and take a stance on issues related to national security or war and peace.
Meanwhile, Tom Homan, who will be overseeing border control and immigration during Trump's second term, has indicated that the administration could rely on private contractors for tasks that do not require credentials. Companies like GEO Group and Core Civic, which have previously assisted ICE with migrant detention efforts, saw their stock values soar following Trump's election.
Given the existing resources towards immigration enforcement activity, there is no way to do a deportation effort on the scale that Trump has talked about. Any mass deportation effort of 1 million people or more would require huge resource investments, including contracting with private companies likely to build more detention centers. We're actually seeing that happen under President Biden right now. More detention centers are being built. So I would expect that to continue if there was some kind of mass deportation, increase.
Experts say that the great challenge to the deportation plan may lie in securing cooperation from the states.
The majority of deportations happen after somebody's picked up by local law enforcement, whether for a minor crime or a major crime. ICE finds out that that person's in custody. They request to the local law enforcement to hold that migrant for up to 48 hours. And then ICE comes and takes custody and starts people's processing for removal. For a variety of reasons, more jurisdictions have decided not to comply with these requests from ICE to hold people. These local policies seem to be one of the reasons why interior deportations dropped from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, even though the Trump administration last time also said that they wanted to really ramp up deportations and immigration enforcement.
If he knowingly harbors and conceals an illegal alien, I will prosecute him.
Tom Homan directed those powerful words at Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson as the incoming border czar gets ready to conduct a mass deportation starting next month.
The federal government has competency for immigration matters, not the states, and they're challenging the federal government to do its job. What I would say to that is there's a lot of federal money flowing into these cities and states, supporting their police, their justice system, their educational system, their hospitals, and all kinds of other things that they expect the federal government to give them. I don't really see why the federal government, at least the White House, would support giving billions of dollars to cities and states that are ignoring their obligation to help the federal government. So we may end up with a situation where there's a financial crunch, which forces a rethink.
Not related to what that individual just said, but a moment before, I think they basically said the immigration or deportation czar. For myself, I think I mentioned this before, but under Trump, there seems to be so many czars of things. I don't remember there being czars for other presidents. I can't think of a single czar for Biden, or at least nobody who's referenced that way, or like Obama, for instance. Even for Bush, I don't recall anybody. This seems to be a particular Trump thing. Maybe I'm just misremembering and didn't pay as much attention in past presidencies, but even today, I don't hear anybody reference any czars under Biden. Again, I'm not sure if this is some type of like political propaganda thing that's happening where they're trying to undermine the authority of these individuals or kind of highlight some negative connotation towards them. But it's just curious to me that I haven't really heard this term used for other authority figures in the government, especially ones that are assigned by the president. But for some reason for Trump, basically everybody is a czar or something. Let me know if you agree or if you know of any czars and I'm just mistaken. I'm happy to review any documentation or videos that you have related to that.
The question of how to approach immigration in the U.S. is as complex as the issue is divisive.
I think that our current conversation has been really divisive and also very black and white. It's, for or against mass deportation. But I think that there's some nuance that could be found. We could both enforce our immigration laws more at the border, think about removing people who are a threat to our country, and think about offering some legal status to people who have been an important part of our workforce, of our communities, who have, US born children. I think Americans would support that. I think that Congress is not ready to talk about it. Congress is struggling to pass legislation overall. It's really struggling to pass immigration legislation, and partisan politics get in the way. But I actually think there are solutions that Americans are pretty broadly in agreement with.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.